Hello and good afternoon. My name is Pamela, and I'm a senior consultant and research lead at Great Place to Work ASEAN and ANZ. We're very happy to have you join us at our very first Workplace Culture Masterclass today. This webinar will be recorded and we'll post excerpts onto our website after the session. If you have questions along the way, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A chat box and we'll get to them at the end of the session. Today's topic is about psychological safety in the workplace, and we are very happy to have with us Jitendra Khurana, General Manager of Signify in Singapore, Brunei, Cambodia, and Myanmar. Signify topped the Singapore Best Workplaces list for the small category in both 2020 and 2021. And who better to learn from but the best of the best? Before we dive into the interview, I'd like to say a few words about Great Place to Work. Great Place to Work is the global authority on workplace culture. Since 1992, we've surveyed more than 100 million people around the world and used those deep insights to define what makes a great workplace experience. We help organizations quantify their culture and produce better business results by helping them create a high-trust work experience for all employees. Everything we do is driven by our mission to build a better world by helping organizations become great places to work for all. Now let me introduce Jit. He has been with Signify since 1999 and has experience in varied roles and postings to 4 different regions. In 2013, he came to Singapore to head the company's professional lighting business here. He also took up a leadership role for international accounts across ASEAN Pacific. In 2018, Jit was appointed General Manager for Singapore and emerging Southeast Asian markets. Under his leadership, his team achieved the top rank in Southeast Asia for the fastest growth in smart systems and services, with doubling of sales in these areas over the past 2 years. Welcome, Jit. We are very happy to have you here with us today.
Hi, good afternoon, Pam. Good afternoon, everybody. My pleasure. Also excited to be here with everybody today. Yeah.
At Great Place to Work, we define great workplaces as one where you trust the people you work for, have pride in your job, and experience camaraderie with your colleagues. And none of this would be possible without psychological safety at work. And indeed, 93% of your employees say that Signify is a psychologically and emotionally healthy place to work. Can you share what psychological safety means in Signify and how you cultivate and reinforce such a work environment?
Sure, Pam. Thank you very much for setting the scene and asking that very important part of the psychological safety concept. So let me start with potentially defining the psychology safety first. So it's basically a definition proposed by Amy Edmondson, the professor from the Harvard Business School. She defines that it's a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. In simple words, it means that employees should feel free to give and receive feedback, ask difficult questions, ask for help, raise issues and concerns, offer solutions to problems, and even admit errors without any worries of being penalized or ridiculed. In simple words, we must encourage our people to bring their full self, and we must value their opinions and contributions they bring to the organization. And when we do that, I think as an organization, we reap immense benefits, from the same. For example, psychological safety improves employee engagement. For example, if the team members feel safe at work, it's easier for them to participate in meetings. It's easier for them to collaborate and engage with customers, with peers in general, which in turn leads to productivity improvements, faster learning among the team members, and build resilience in the organization. Psychological safety also fosters an inclusive workplace culture. So safe environments welcome diverse teams and allow them to flourish regardless of their backgrounds. Furthermore, it also inspires creativity and drives innovations. I think if we look at our own selves, for example, it is our knowledge and ideas that we bring, with which we bring value to the organization. So in order for us to be creative, we need to ensure that the ideas from various people flow organically, and our teams must feel safe in expressing themselves. I think it won't be wrong to also say psychological safe environments also, improves the employee well-being. Psychologically safe environments are symbolizes the trust and the positive environment and culture within the teams. Hence, it also ensures that the team members can be open, transparent, and can trust each other, which further helps them, in terms of boosting their own morale and well-being. Last but not the least, I think psychological safety also boosts team performance. I think it cannot be more important in today's world, which is very uncertain and very interconnected. In today's knowledge economy, we must leverage the collective wisdom and the brain power we have in the organization. And this can be only done by integrating ideas from multiple people, and which requires willingness for people to speak candidly and in a timely manner. Now, this is not just me speaking about it. Of course, we practice this. We are a big proponent of this concept in general. But I think there are also the whole world, there are enough number of white papers, research papers established. I would like to reference here the one which was published by Google in 2015, where they were studying, the key dimensions which basically differentiates the high performing teams from others. And they established through their 2-year-long research that psychological safety is by far the top and the most differentiating factor among the high performing teams. Having said that, I think when it comes to Signify, we have a reasonably simple 3-step approach. We believe respecting each member of the team, regardless of their role or level in the organization. We value their work, their insights and contributions. We accept for who they are and the unique strengths they bring along. And I think this whole concept of this approach is deeply anchored and connected to our diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda, which is again one of the 4 elements which drives the culture in the organization. So we strongly believe, to sum it up, we strongly believe that the diverse opinions, experiences, and knowledge are best leveraged when team members feel comfortable to speak up, and our teams are fully empowered to share their unique perspectives with each other. Yeah.
Thank you. Wow, it sounds like it's a cornerstone of your entire culture.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So for Signify, being a great place to work is not just by happy coincidence or byproduct of your culture and practices, but it is explicitly articulated in your 5 frontier strategies. And you mentioned just now that it does contribute to your business strategy as well. So can you share more about how being this great place to work is so core to your business strategy?
Sure. So we have what we call it as a 5 frontier strategy, which you see on the screen now. I think the strategy is based on the very fact that the environment which we all live in today is highly dynamic, is changing and changing very, very fast. To take an example of climate change, trade barriers, sustainability related issues, supply disruptions, digitization, and the most recent one to add to the whole challenging ecosystem is the recent war which we saw. I think our 5 frontier strategy, in essence, is our roadmap of how we would like to respond to these changes, how we would adjust and adapt to these changes, but at the same time, how we will drive growth and value creation for the organization in general. We know to actually drive the strategy, people are central. And the effectiveness of the strategy rests solely on our aspirations to be a great place to work for our people. So we will invest in our people, create diverse, equitable, and inclusive workspace. And we are committed to reskilling our people in digital and commercial skills, which in some sense will also respond to this ever-changing environment and create value for our customers. I must say that diversity, equity, and inclusion is central to our workplace strategy. Now, we know for sure that diverse and inclusion basically are critical for innovations. It helps us to maximize talent and productivity, and it is key to the overall performance. It helps us deliver best results, and I think it is most effective when it is part of the organizational culture itself. And that's the reason that DE&I is part of our one of the key pillars of our four pillar, which defines the organizational culture itself.
Yeah. In the note of DE&I, we know that the lighting industry, like many other engineering sectors, still tends to be more male dominated. And today is International Women's Day, and we know that more women are making inroads into traditionally male-dominated sectors, including the lighting industry. And right. 100% of employees at Signify say that people here are treated fairly, regardless of their gender. Can you share Signify's approach to selecting, supporting, and enabling the women in your workforce?
Right. Let me first apologize and also take the opportunity to wish you and everybody in the call happy International Women's Day. Yes, so part of our DE&I strategy, diversity, of course, is critical. And within the diversity aspects of our strategy, we have two key pillars. One is about increasing the participation of the women in general across the different levels. And the second part is, of course, infusing younger talent in the organization. I think those are two key elements, apart from few others, but these are the two key, which are, of course, quite central to our diversity strategy. We have various programs in general, and I would say all these programs are strongly driven with a clear business objectives, where we have ensured that the diversity objectives are percolated and assigned at various parts of the organization. And we have programs like we have inclusion and diversity ambassador programs. We continue to invest into women talent, not just by having more women in the organization, but also, developing them further via sponsorships, mentoring, and of course, similar programs. I think key here is that we have also established a program called Better Lives for Better World program, wherein we have gone out to state and our objective on women participation. We have committed to double the percentage of women in the leadership roles to 34% by 2025. So we are committed to it, and this is also our commitment in general, to the wider stakeholders in the business world. Yeah.
Thank you. So we've heard a lot about what Signify does at an organization, but now let's hear what you do, Jit, as a leader to personally create that high trust culture and cultivate psychological safety to build a great workplace for all your employees. Can you share things like perhaps your personal philosophy, values, even day-to-day actions, decision-making, and interactions? How do you role model?
Yeah, very, very, very important. I think because as the leader, you shape and define, the organizational culture in a big way. And I think some of the things which we practice commonly, or which I also try to, practice, imbibe on a day-to-day basis. I think few which I would like to list as such would be, first, I would say is practice genuine curiosity. I think it is very important that as leaders, we actively solicit questions. We ask people for their inputs, their contributions, seek their feedback, on an ongoing basis to ensure that we have the strong input and value addition from everybody in the organization. I think other important part is, which I also mentioned in my earlier point, that we must promote respect for all in the organization. And once we do that, I think it also, of course, lower down the barrier for people, and they feel much more comfortable to, in general, engage and contribute. I think here I would also like to pinpoint that as a leader, it is very important that one intervenes and prevent any behaviors which discourages or undermines and shame others. And I think it's very, very critical that you set, the cultural aspects which are more, around the respect for all, and literally nip, any negativity at the bud itself. I think also very important is to value and appreciate people. When people contribute, it's very important that we value their inputs and of course appreciate for what they bring, on the table. Other thing which is generally not that easy, but I feel it's very critical, is owning up your own mistakes. And I think as leaders, it's totally fine, and I even feel it's to some extent critical to be vulnerable, to accept your fallibilities in that sense. And in some sense, I think it's a true mark of strength. It basically also demonstrates in general a willingness to improve and, set out a recipe for encouraging open and honest feedbacks. So I think once as a leader, you own up to your mistakes and you're open to be vulnerable, you're open to basically discuss it with the wider audience, you are also, in some sense suggesting people that they are also, it's totally fine to make mistakes. In fact, it should be more that we should celebrate the mistakes as learning opportunities. I think another important part as a leader is that we should also continuously reinforce the sense of purpose in the organization. I think psychological safety, of course, encourage people to be their full self, to contribute. But I think it is important again that everybody in the organization understands that how their work creates an impact to the business, but also at the larger purpose of the organization. And once they do that, in some sense, it also stimulates and motivates them to contribute even more. So I think that's another very, very important part. And in general, I would say, and I think that's very critical, that as a business leader, we are all very driven from a performance perspective. And I think within my own leadership team and in our organization, we truly believe in the business impact, psychologically safe, trusting, and a positive environments create. And I think that's really an important part, that while we look at all the other softer aspects, there are hard business benefits, which we also drive when we see people, heavily engaged and contributing in general.
Thank you. I really like what you shared about being vulnerable and owning up to mistakes. Yeah, it's really humbling in that sense, because in many organizations, I think the idea of psychological safety, you're right, is actually from the top, and how leaders react to mistakes and whether they show that they are human themselves, actually, I think really sets the tone. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Okay, so if I were to ask you, my next question would be, do you have any tips or a key message for leaders in small organizations who are now aspiring to be a great place to work as well? Is there a particular message, any key actions that they should prioritize perhaps as the first step in this journey?
Sure. So my small little inputs in this regard to all the participants and also fellow leaders, I would start by saying that psychologically safe work environments are actually rare. These are not the environments which are very common yet. I think we need to understand and recognize that it's very natural for people to hold back ideas, be reluctant to ask questions, shy away from disagreeing with their bosses. I think it's very, very normal. And if we as leaders are not hearing from our people, we are going to miss out on a potential next game-changing ideas, be it for a new product or a new service. Or we might be even missing out, potentially an early warning, for a threat, which somebody would have foreseen, but was very uncomfortable to bring it to his or her boss. So I think that's a very fact that we need to understand what the baseline is. And I think, again, there are a lot of studies, which kind of validate that. I would like to reference one, which was established by Gallup in 2017, where they said that only 3 out of 10 workers in the US strongly agree that their opinion seems to count. Now, it's only 3 out of 10, so it's just mere 30%. The study also goes on to explain that if this ratio improves to 6 on 10, for example, it will lead to 27% reduction in employee turnover, 40% reduction in safety incidents, and 12% increase in productivity. There was another study from McKinsey in 2020 during pandemic, which also confirms that only a handful of business leaders often demonstrate positive behaviors which instill psychological safety at workplace. So it's an important and I would say relevant topic, for all of us to ponder upon. Again, as Signify, we are not done yet. We are also on the journey as we speak. And I think all I would like to say, especially for the leaders who would like to embark upon this, that while you have a lot of benefits of this, it helps your employer branding, it helps your employee engagement, it helps to drive innovations, it helps to drive better decisions, it helps to drive growth. I think there are a lot of, and I can go on and on, there are a lot of positives which are more making a positive business case for you as a business owner. Hence, I would say lead by example and go all out to implement this.
Oh, I love that. I really love that answer. Okay, on that note, my last question before we open to the floor to the questions is basically that, okay, so Signify has been number one on the Singapore Best Workplaces list for small companies for the past 2 years. What does this mean to you and your employees?
Yeah, it's very dear to us. I would start with saying that. I think it brings, I would say, immense sense of pride among the team. That would be the first thing I would like to mention. It basically gives us also deeper insights. I think, especially the survey, when the results comes, I think the survey is very powerful to also uncover, I would say, a lot of deeper, aspects of the organization and how people, of course, react and behave to that. It's also validation. Yeah, for us, it's a validation of our people and workplace strategy. It helps our employer branding for sure. I think it helps for people who are with us or who would join us to actually, anticipate what kind of culture do we have in the organization. And I think it also, in some sense, brings us as a part of the community. I must say I made some very great friends, out of these events which I attended from Great Place to Work.
Very happy to hear that. Okay, so now I'm just going to open the floor to questions. You can either unmute yourselves to ask or type your questions in the Q&A chat box. And I see we've got a couple of questions from that I can see. And the first question here is, how do you ensure consistency among your people leaders? How do you make sure that they are all aligned in their actions and behaviors to build trust and a psychologically safe environment for their teams?
Yeah, very good question. So yeah, I think that there are a few factors to basically look at. One is, I think this has to be driven from the top, for sure. I think the business leaders will have to take the ownership to shape, to define, and to influence the psychological safety at workplace in general. Second, I think it is very important that as much as possible, and I think I feel very comfortable to basically drive this, because this is in some sense interwoven and deeply connected to the organizational culture itself. Now, we all know that psychological safety is a key component of diversity, equity, and inclusion in general. And D&I for us is one of the 4 pillars which define the organizational culture. So, and once it starts to become the organizational culture, I think you start to see more and more people sign up and embrace that. Then there are a few other tactical parts. I think you will, if you want to make an effective psychological safety interventions, it's very critical that this is well understood by different parts of the organization. And I think it's just not one person who is going to do it. I think you need to, of course, cascade, a better understanding of the same across the different layers of the organization, for which I would say then, yes, for example, in Signify, we have a very extensive DE&I training for all the people managers, so much so that we are also assessed by a third party, on how well we understand and how are we performing, on a D&I strategy in general. And I think that in some sense also serves us, with a clear dipstick test and of course a feedback loop in terms of how well our people have understood and how they are in general practicing the same on a day-to-day basis. I think these are some of the things. And again, important is one has to be very persistent. These kind of strategy, you just don't start and finish in a matter of weeks or months. It takes sometimes in years. And that's why I also tend to say that we are on the journey. It's not something which you can, assume that you have done it for a year and you are there. So I think it's very important that you continue to drive this. And I think once this becomes, and again, for us, that's easy because it's also part of our business strategy. Yeah? It's not a strategy which is disconnected in some sense to our business plan. It is part of our business strategy. And I think that helps us in some sense to make sure that we have a cohesive approach, towards psychological safety in general. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so the next question I see is, what was the biggest challenge you faced personally in the journey to becoming a great workplace, and how did you overcome that?
Sure. Yeah, that's an interesting one. So I think the biggest challenge, especially in the recent years, was COVID, for sure. I think especially in 2020 and again in 2021, I think apart from, of course, the typical concerns on safety of people in general, I think there were a lot of other business challenges which came up in 2021, especially around supply chain disruptions, etc. So I think these were 2 years which was indeed very challenging for us. I think especially in the COVID year, I think one additional dimension which basically was more challenging to handle was the insecurity among the people in general. And I think you would totally agree with me that insecurity does not help openness, positive, and the trusting environment in general. And I think that's why it was super critical for us to step up our game to ensure that we were even further intensifying our engagements with the team, to making sure that they had a transparent view of how we were responding to the COVID related challenges, whether be it on the people side related to safety aspects and well-being aspects of the people, but also what we were doing on the business side. And that increased intense engagements and open and transparent communications in some sense helped us lower that insecurities, among the different people. And of course, we had to continue with our, I would say, typical, engagements and creating, platforms for people to again continuously engage and contribute. But I think it was indeed, in some sense, one of the most challenging periods for us to ensure that we don't get disrupted, on our journey, towards, of course, keeping a very diverse, inclusive, and of course, engaging, workforce during the COVID period.
Okay, I'm going to read the next question. It's quite long. How do you measure the success of your D&I efforts? Apart from the number of female leaders in leadership positions, what other ways do you measure success? Particularly, a lot of these D&I and psychological safety culture really comes down to behaviors and actions of individuals, and leaders. So how do you know you are successful?
Yeah, very, 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 very good question. And I think this is, in some sense, very, very critical, because you need some sense of monitoring and measurement in place to ensure and to check and to validate that you are on track. So again, for us, we have quarterly measurement systems in place. We do a very extensive team surveys on a quarterly basis, which essentially stipulates, aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion in that survey, which we run through with the organization 100% across the organization on a quarterly basis. And of course, that in some sense give us again the sense, that how are we performing on our DE&I aspects on a quarterly basis. And the survey is fairly granular. We get that report on almost on 70% 70% of the people managers gets that report, which means that the surveys are fairly granular for us to actually study those aspects at a fairly deep level of the organization. It's not a survey which is just done at a higher level. So we can actually drill down to a very deep level and actually uncover that how the teams are responding to those aspects on an ongoing basis. And of course, then we have cadences and mechanics in place essentially to study the results on a quarterly basis with, of course, the leadership and the management teams. And then we, of course, very quickly after the deep dives, we draw up our actions and follow through on that. So I think for us, there is a discipline and a cadence in place essentially to test this and to monitor this on an ongoing basis. We do get some deviations. We do see some hiccups on the go. And important is that we take these results on a quarterly basis very seriously. We take a deep dive every quarter, and we define, of course, the corrective actions then and there. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your sharing, Jit. This has been really fantastic, and I hope everyone tuning in learned as much as I did today. As mentioned
Thank you, Pam.
earlier, this is our first Workplace Culture Masterclass. Our next masterclass will be with Christopher Ong, Managing Director of DHL Express Singapore, on Tuesday, 12 April at 3 p.m. on how DHL managed to turn the COVID-19 crisis into an opportunity to emerge stronger. Now, if you would like to start your journey toward becoming a great workplace and be recognized on our 2022 Singapore Best Workplaces list, the first step is to get certified. We will be flashing a QR code, and you can scan that on the screen or connect with us on our social media to find out more after this. When you close this session, a feedback form will pop up, and your feedback is really important to us. So please spend about 2 minutes to complete the survey. Thank you so much and have a lovely afternoon.